I'm Jay Rosenthal.
I'm Krista Raymond.
This is Pod of Flowers, the official podcast of Hall of Flowers. We are in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, September 2023. Hall of Flowers number 2.
Number 2.
In Canada. We're here with Jack Lloyd. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for having me. How are you guys doing?
We are good. It's been a long day, but we're
Sure.
talking to very interesting people, you among them. Tell us about NORML in Canada and what your role is.
Well, NORML Canada is the national organization for the reform of marijuana laws in Canada. We're Canada's oldest cannabis legalization activist group. The American NORML is very, very well known there. We've been in existence.
Although legalization, not so much.
Right, so we succeeded with legalization.
Not to brag, but...
And so we were, right, so we are still active and we're advocating for sensible policy reforms in regards to cannabis. And we're here talking with people and signing up new members and gauging what people are interested in for changes to our existing regulatory policy.
And what are those things? I have a list. It's here.
Oh, that's more fascinating to me than anything.
No, I'm just kidding.
Big policy changes for us are changes to the potency restrictions on various cannabis products. This is a source of constant complaints from the cannabis consumers in the cannabis community and for retailers that are seeking more flexibility in the products that they're able to sell directly to consumers, and for producers who could very easily produce different products and who are unable to do so. And part of the frustration, of course, NORML Canada comes from an activist background. I'm counsel on one of the cases. The restriction on the potency for THC in various cannabis derivative products has been struck down as unconstitutional twice. So courts of inherent jurisdiction, so like very important courts here, have said you cannot be limiting how potent the THC is in these products, and we still don't have any serious regulatory change on that front. So that's a big part for NORML Canada, certainly. Certainly very close to my heart as well.
And consumers and retailers.
Right. I think that anyone that's a mature cannabis participant in the cannabis space is comfortable with slightly more potent products.
Right, especially with the labeling restrictions. Like, all taken, the potency doesn't make a ton of sense. Like, I think here it doesn't make a ton of sense.
Right. Yeah. Certainly courts have said that it's a completely arbitrary restriction. Yeah. And I'm right there with you.
I am too. It's interesting because, well, for those that are watching or listening that are Canadian, that are not Canadian, like, we have a 10 milligram edible limit per pack in Canada, which someone listening to that in California will be like, well, that's like a tenth of a pack potentially.
Right.
Or Michigan.
Right. It's like
1/20th.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Michigan's a great example with a very diverse and broad array of products available through the local program. I absolutely.
They have other challenges. There are other challenges, but potency on edibles is not one of them. Right?
Yes.
Right.
What I think is interesting in your work, specifically in this space, is that when we look back in Canada, everybody, like licensed producers, retailers, customers, all had their own things that they wanted addressed. And I feel like, and I'd love to know from you, but it's taken the Canadian industry kind of a long time to come together and be like, what are the things that we can rally around behind as a group where we're all stakeholders in the positive outcome of changes. And it's taken time to get here, but I feel like we're at a point right now where there is some consistency of message across those three groups.
I think that's a really fair point. And anyone looking at the Canadian industry sees like a lot of rises and a lot of falls for businesses that have made efforts to make it in this space. And, we're a long way into legalization now, in fairness. And I agree that most participants in the industry, either from a production and wholesale sale perspective to a retail perspective, like the whole entirety of the industry agrees on those key points. And you've mentioned packaging. That's a huge one. It's extraordinarily restrictive insofar as how it's organized. And really what that flows from a legal perspective, is the cigarette industry, right? So tobacco packaging is the closest parallel to cannabis packaging, and it's not a fair comparison. And so it's seriously restricting the free speech of a whole host of businesses in the cannabis space, even down to retailers. They're limited in the types of bags they can put the product in when someone walks out of the store. And as well, the packaging that the end product is in, right? So there, of course, there's very visible excise tax markations. It's unlikely we're going to get around that. The government wants a tax. But as far as health warnings, limitations on color, limitations on shape, limitations on what can be expressed, all of commercial expression is free expression.
Can I ask you, I don't know if this is a legal question, but it's possible in tobacco because of public health rationale. Like they've made a rationale that for public health reasons, the packaging needs to be plain and all these restrictions has to be behind like a gate, a visual gate in the store. But like those same implications are not the same in cannabis, yet we still have those same restrictions. Is that the legal argument that we are not the same? There's no public health risk here, therefore packaging should be...
Absolutely. The difference is with tobacco, you had giant cases in which people got very, very sick from smoking cigarettes for years and then sued these companies. And it went to the Supreme Court of Canada, and the Supreme Court of Canada said, yeah, this is a harmful substance, and we're going to need to limit how you advertise it so that you're not just aggressively encouraging more people to smoke cigarettes. Cannabis has never had that. In fact, that was litigated, right? And there was never a finding that that cannabis was particularly harmful. The closest we've come is a case called Malmo, Levine, Clay, and Kane, in which the Supreme Court of Canada said that it was a relatively benign substance.
Perfect.
That's as harmful as cannabis has gotten. It's
relatively benign. Yeah. It's a good brand name, actually.
Right.
Really good.
So I think that the heavy restriction on promotion, advertising, things like that, doesn't apply to cannabis, right? It's relatively benign. So that's the key difference. I think that eventually it's going to be litigated. It's possible that these prohibitions and restrictions are lifted, they're balanced out, but ultimately, right now, promotion of cannabis is as severely restricted as tobacco.
Yes.
So that's ultimately a problem for these businesses as well.
Whereas, let me make another point that is actually being talked about now, whereas gambling in Ontario is literally every third ad on TV.
Right.
Especially during games about in-game betting.
Right.
Like how that is benign. That's not a little bit benign. That's fucked up.
No, you have a giant economic problem associated with it, and certainly serious personal hardship associated with gambling addiction, and you don't have that with cannabis, right? So the only addictive thing with cannabis is probably growing it, right? So the classic Ed Rosenthal quote. So I'm with you on that, certainly, and certainly NORML Canada is advocating for more sensible positions. The government's position has always been, because they traveled to jurisdictions where it had been legalized recreationally, and what the federal government in Canada learned was that it's easier to loosen restrictions than tighten them, but ultimately...
Well, maybe we'll get there. But I remember very early days talking about, this is 2017, 2018, about what the restrictions were going to be. And the thought was, yes, we'll start at a place like tobacco and hopefully move towards like the limited restrictions on alcohol. Like that would be a good step forward or regulations backwards. But we're not there yet, but your work, hopefully, if a lot of people here support the work you're doing, we'll get there. I'm hopeful.
One step at a time.
One step at a time. I'm ready for it. I'm ready for stronger edibles. I mean, I know that's very low.
This is very...
It's all about my edible consumption.
Yes.
Well, not necessarily low-hanging fruit. Like this is the clearest, most palpable, easy change that can be made. And there's just consistent refusal to address it.
Even if they doubled it. Like I know that wouldn't be perfect, but like, just double it. Yeah.
Darn toot. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, from your mouth to regulators' ears, I guess. Let's make it happen. Everybody support NORML Canada. We'll put up, not right now, but how to get in touch with you and the organization to join.
yeah, we're on Twitter, NORML Canada on Twitter.
I think it's X now.
X, yes, sorry. I'm very au passe with my
It's okay.
social
I'm always
media.
going to call it Twitter.
X.
I'm always going to call it Twitter. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Hey, that was
Enjoy the rest of
awesome.
the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. A
got it.
pleasure to see you
Thank
both.
you.
Thank you for the awesome work you're doing.